Hi, welcome back to the 9. So the other day I watched a reaction video from ABL to a talk by a woman named Kristen Hawkins, who is the president of an organization called Students for Life. I don't know where you fall on the pro-choice, pro-life spectrum. I consider myself to be pro-choice reluctant. I have come to that conclusion basically because the older that I've gotten, the more pro-life that I have gotten. And also finding because for the most of my life, I really believe that choice was something that was referred to after conception as opposed to something that could be done to prevent conception in the first place. So that's a bit, because I'm in favor of contraception, I can't go through and say full-on pro-life because of that. I find it amazing when you hear somebody speaking like that. I seen a doctor, I believe, I don't know if he was testifying to Congress or to the Supreme Court or something, but he was testifying and he was talking about describing the procedures to terminate a pregnancy, and Ms. Hawkins referred to them as well. And I find it strange that you could be still so adamantly pro-choice when you hear those kinds of descriptions. Ms. Hawkins believes that life begins at conception. She offered some good scientific reasons as to support that. And while I do think that she's right, the thing is that life isn't really much of its own until later on in the pregnancy. It's my understanding that the Hospital for Sick Children here in Toronto has managed to sustain a child that was born at 22 weeks. So I don't know the kind of medical interventions that it would have required for that child to survive, but the child did. I don't know what kind of complications that child has had in their life. But if a hospital can, through medical intervention, manage to save a child born that early in a pregnancy at 22 weeks, then I definitely feel that there does need to be a hard cutoff line. I always had thought that after 4 months, a doctor wouldn't perform a termination, but apparently that's not the case. So for me, I'm going to say if the hard line that I'm going to draw would be at 20 weeks. I would probably even be willing to knock it down to 16. I know Ron DeSantis in Florida has recently signed a bill up for 15 weeks. And even though I'm going to say that that's a little bit outside of the 16 to 20 that I would prefer, I'm going to say that 16 to 20, that the 15 weeks is okay. Apparently, at 15 weeks, your baby can feel pain. So I think one of the things that really got me the most was the behavior of some of the students at this talk. This talk took place at the University of Texas, San Antonio. I will try to remember to put a link to the video in below. It is an hour and 45 minutes long. I didn't think that I would watch the whole thing, but I was just sort of doing some other stuff, and it was just sort of playing in the background, and I did end up watching all of it. The Q&A part is probably one where the most cringy stuff happens, and I would definitely recommend watching the Q&A, but if you don't watch the whole talk, you might not really be able to get the whole Q&A, even though I do think that it's something that you could watch alone, but I think that in order to get the benefit, you should just watch the whole thing. I found that these people who are college university students, so we're talking late teens, early 20s, or behaving in a manner that was not appropriate for people in a setting like that at that age. If you can't have a discussion with somebody without swearing at them, insulting them, cutting them off, and I'm sure that we can make an argument that the cutting off was going on both sides. But it can be very difficult when you're trying to answer somebody's question and they keep cutting you off saying, are you going to answer the question? Are you going to answer the question? It seems that people have really become rigid in their beliefs over the last 20 odd years. And I don't know, maybe it's actually something that people have always been very rigid in their beliefs. And maybe I just keep looking at the world a little bit too much through my own eyes and through my own filters. And I know that I'm fairly flexible. That's not to say that I don't have my beliefs that I would be very rigid on. But I can be swayed. I can hear a good argument and I can say, okay, you know what, that's given me something to think about. I can try and figure out how to work it in with my own already existing thoughts, beliefs, and opinions. But it seems like a lot of other people can't. To the very point where somebody is going to come and they're going to have a discussion about what they think and what they believe, and somebody else thinks that they have a right to shut it down because they don't agree with what the person is saying. And I think that that's pretty concerning, but I also think that that's a bit of a topic for another conversation. So I'm not too sure when this happened, but at some point the pro-choice movement started becoming a lot more pro-abortion, and I would say that that probably started happening over the last 10 years or so. I don't think it's something that should be being celebrated. Like, I'd almost say that I don't think it's something that should be normalized, but I don't think that a woman should feel any kind of shame for making this decision. I think that it's a very difficult decision for a woman to make. I think that that has really been being downplayed over the last while. Oh, you just go and you get an abortion and it's nothing. And there's a lot of correlated things. When a woman gets pregnant, her body does a lot of releases a lot of different hormones and everything. And when that suddenly stops, you can't just think that everything's going to be okay. There's going to be all kinds of issues, and maybe not necessarily physical issues, but emotional and mental issues. There's things that have to be talked about. I always remember one of my friends when I was in high school. Actually, no, we finished high school. She was in college. I didn't go to college. But she had gotten pregnant, and I remember when she told me, she was like, yeah, no, it's gone. I've got the appointments on Monday. I'm not having this baby. And when I talked to her a few days after, she was like, it was the biggest mistake that I ever made. And she made it, she made it with, it's not like she's like, oh my God, I just don't want this. She's like, I'm 18, I'm in school, I can't afford it. Like, there were the legitimate reasons that you could kind of think of. Legitimate reasons might be a little bit of a questionable take there. But it seems like for some reason we've gotten to a point where we're really celebrating it. And, oh yeah, I've had this many, and oh, this and the other. I'm like, this is probably going to sound pretty darn judgy. And I don't care, because I think that it probably is pretty darn judgy. If you're having multiple abortions, you're doing something wrong. I'm just going to put it that. I'm just going to say it there. Like, if you're constantly getting pregnant when you don't want to be pregnant, why aren't you taking contraceptives? Like, why aren't you on the pill? Why don't you have an IUD? Do you somehow think that the IUD or the birth control pill are going to be more damaging to you than an abortion? Like, no. One of the things that I do find weird, whenever we talk about how abortion is healthcare, it's women's rights or whatever, and I'm thinking, well, why would a woman have a right to an abortion? And actually, yeah, go ahead, put that down in the comments below. I'd like to know why you think a woman has a right to kill a living thing. To me, there's an implication there that a woman has a right to sex, which isn't true. Nobody has a right to sex because I have a right to say no. And basically, like, a woman has no need for an abortion unless a man has gotten her pregnant. And I think that the fact that a man has no say in what happens in that pregnancy is a problem. I don't think I have a solution for it, but to try to deny that a man would be on the hook, that he would be responsible for a baby that he doesn't want, and yet if he wants the child and she doesn't, he doesn't have any say. Like, there's definitely some inequality there, and I think that that's something that needs to be fixed. But I get it because, like, sure, the guy says that he wants the baby now, but what happens when you're 6 months along and he's gone? Well, first off, if you're 6 months along, so you're going to be having a kid, maybe you need to start talking to somebody about adoption if you're not wanting to become a mother. I've heard that the adoption system is broken, and I wouldn't be surprised in that. Like, I know there's all kinds of people out there that are waiting for newborns, and that newborns don't have a problem getting adopted. So I think really to go through and to talk about the abortion system, or pardon me, the adoption system being broken, I don't know how much that really applies for this situation. As Ms. Hawkins was saying in the talk, she's like, well, if you decide 2 years after your baby's born that you don't want the baby anymore, is it okay to get rid of it? Well, you could put it up for adoption, but no, it's not going to be okay for you to destroy that life. And she was really trying to push on the people who were, she was really trying to push on, well, when does life begin? And, oh, well, no, it's not alive, it's just a clump of cells. And she pointed out, she's like, well, I'm a clump of cells. It's true. Everything in me, I'm made up of cells. Cells upon cells upon cells. So how does that mean that my life is more valuable than that clump of cells that will become a person, just like me? I found that there were a few things from that Miss Hawkins said that I was like, yeah, that's a Christian take there. And it wasn't like in a drug. I was like, that's a good Christian take. All life is valuable. Somebody had brought up and said, well, like, oh, well, if you're going to go from your God, like, do you think that God would want a person to have a child that was born out of violence? Well, if we're going to go for a God perspective here, I'm going to take the position that if God didn't want that life to exist, it wouldn't. My sister did a project when we were in high school, and she was kind of surprised to find out, like, how difficult it is for a woman to actually get pregnant. Like, there's a very, very small window where she's able to get pregnant. So, while yes, I know that a sexual assault can result in that pregnancy, it's a pretty It's fairly rare. And again, because of the pro-choice reluctant stance that I take, I wouldn't have a problem with her terminating that pregnancy, so long as it was within no more than 20 weeks. Because let's face it, if you got raped, you know that there's a possibility that a baby could be created. So that's something you got to be considerate of, and you've got to and like, yeah, you've got to be taking those tests if you were raped. So now one of the things that I'm kind of wondering about, what's the worst thing that would happen if, say, the Supreme Court in the U.S. overturned Roe v. Wade? What's the worst thing that would happen if abortion became legal? I know that there are people out there that will say that there will be women that will be dying because they're so desperate to go through and to terminate the pregnancy that they will literally risk their lives, whether it's something that they do to themselves, whether they go to the guy with the dirty knife and the folding table. But I don't think that we will suddenly see this huge jump in illegal abortion-related deaths. I don't think that will happen. I feel like if we get to that place where abortion is legal, I think that I would like to hope that there would be the exemptions in that, the assault, incest, threat to the mother's life. But yeah, I'd like to see a point where we're not looking at abortion, where we don't have abortions anymore because we don't need them, because again, we have gotten our education and our access to contraceptives have become that much better. I think that when a woman has to think about getting pregnant when she has sex, I think that it's going to cut down on the number of unwanted pregnancies. I think that it's going to be a much bigger risk. It's not going to be something like, oh, well, if I get pregnant, I can just have an abortion. Well, no, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have two options. You're going to keep the child or you're going to put it up for adoption. So I don't know. I don't really know how bad of a situation that would be. Like, I honestly, I'm not so sure. Like, and so if you're somebody out there who is pro-choice or even pro-abortion, like, I'd like to know what you think about that. What is the worst thing that would happen if abortion were suddenly banned? Now, I know one of the arguments is that so one of the things that definitely had me changing my thoughts about abortion was parental or father's rights. I don't know what the solution for this problem is, but I think that but I don't think that it's something that we can ignore. When it comes to pregnancy, a father doesn't really get a lot of say in what happens. So I have some examples here. So we're going to go through and we're going to use the example of a man and a woman have sex and a baby is created. Now there's a few ways that this can play out. So the first one is the man and the woman take responsibility. Now maybe they're already in a relationship and maybe they've already sort of had a conversation about what would happen if a pregnancy were to suddenly occur. So they're going to take responsibility. They're going to commit to each other and to their kid, and they're going to live happily ever after. And I usually put a little asterisk on that. Sure, these people could break up. They might not. They might not be able to make it work, but ultimately the best situation for a child is with a married mother and father. So I think that that's definitely something that we should be looking at pushing more. Now, I know that there's people that are going to be like, well, what about men who abuse, misuse, etc.? And this is one of the things that I'm going to go say, and I'm not the first person to say it. Be more discriminating about who you're sleeping with. Okay, don't just go and hop into bed with somebody on the first date. You don't know that person. Wait until you know that person. Wait until you have a better idea of that person. Now, the second situation that can happen is that the woman wants the baby and the man doesn't. Now, the man could say that he would be interested in having her terminate. He may be able to give her all kinds of really logical, reasonable reasons. But basically, if she wants that kid, he's on the hook for 18 years and there's nothing he can say about it. So that's one of the things that I think that maybe we should look at if we're going to talk about equality and stuff. Maybe a man needs to be able to sign his parental rights away. Say, look, I don't want to have anything to do with this child. So basically it would be some sort of a legal termination of his rights, which is not really that much different than what an abortion is. A mother is legally terminating her responsibilities of being a mother. Now, the third option, and this is probably where the really tricky one would come in, would be where the man wants the baby but the woman doesn't. I knew of a situation in high school where a guy had gotten his girlfriend pregnant and she didn't want the baby and she did actually end up aborting it, but he really wanted her to have it because he had been adopted and he wanted this woman to give his child, this girl, he wanted this girl to give his child the opportunity that his mother gave him. No, didn't happen. There are men out there who want to be fathers. Men want to be fathers just as much as women do. It was something that I was a little bit surprised to find out. Just because of my body as a woman is designed to have babies and the biological clock is real. I just didn't really know that it was also as real for men because, a 70-year-old man can get a woman pregnant. But a 70-year-old woman's probably not getting pregnant. Now, I do see the problem with this because here it is and the man wants the baby and now you're 8 months along and now he doesn't want it anymore. Or he's gone. So now what? Now you've got to have the kid. Maybe you have actually sort of bonded with it. So it's one of the things this is a really tricky situation because I do believe that men's rights need to be factored in, but I'm not too sure how well it could be done. I do think that men also need to be taking more responsibility for their actions. Like, it would be one thing if a man just kept making babies with the same woman over and over, but there are a lot of men out there who have gone out and they've made babies with multiple different women. And again, it's one thing if you're doing everything you can to take care of those women and your multiple children. But in a lot of cases, that's not happening. And there are men that are going out and they're making babies and they just don't care. They're gone. So I think that we do need to start really teaching about responsibility. Like, while I was writing up my little script here, I sort of found myself thinking that, there's a lot of similarities between driving and having sex. They're both privileges, not rights. Because, like I said, I have the right to say no. They both have a lot of responsibility. A car can be used as a weapon. You've got to really be careful when you're behind the wheel. You've got to be aware. Like, there's a lot of things that you've got to be thinking about. And there's probably a very good argument to be made that we give out licenses too young, and that when we're at 16, when people are able to get their license, that maybe they aren't actually mature enough to handle that responsibility. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons why Ontario brought in graduated licensing. I don't know if that's really made any big difference or anything. I don't really think that I'm interested in even looking up the numbers to find out. But, when it takes 2 to 3 years to get your full license, and that there are restrictions as you're going along, as opposed to you could go and get your 365 and then 2 days later go and get your license. So it's something that I think should be considered. Like, if you get behind the wheel and you take somebody's life, you're going to be held responsible for that. And we can talk about the fact that our system maybe doesn't hold people who cause a loss of life through a motor vehicle. There can be an argument can be made that we're not punishing these people enough. So, in closing, definitely the way that I'm looking at this is, if it's not okay to take a life with your car, it's not okay to take a life. And I find it strange that we have to go through and have a debate as to when life begins. But I guess that's where we're at. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I hope that this wasn't quite as rambly and disjointed as I kind of think it was. But yeah, have a great day, and until next time, we'll see you later.